and taking that out. Now, what that means is that organisations are going to have to start thinking about how do they insure themselves in different ways to cover that risk. And of course, if you're passing that down to your suppliers, who will pass it to their sub-suppliers, i.e. your smaller and smaller organisations, is you're going to actually contract organisations out of business because they physically can't trade. They can't hold that risk. Those that do, what we've seen in the UK, the consequence, and it's slightly different, is the government loan scheme to small and medium enterprises was being administered through the banks. And so this is government-backed money that the banks are loaning, and the banks are asking for 30% interest rates. They're asking owners to secure their personal homes against the loan to receive the money, the government-backed money. And, you know, that's just the way banks are, unfortunately, or have been. Yet despite that, right when this was launched, a government minister stood up and said, this is the bank's opportunity to repay the goodwill that was given to them in 2008 when the population of this country bankrolled the banks and stopped them going out of business. So to answer your question about contracts is, I think people are going to reduce and go into, to your words, protectionism at a micro level, and the consequences of that are going to be wide-ranging and quite disruptive in terms of the global trading system and how that operates. You know, we may well find that, yes, we look at risk profiles country by country, but actually it might not simply be things like geopolitical issues. It might not be infrastructure availability. It may well be how many other people are already doing that sort of business in that part of the world. And the more there are, the greater the risk. Therefore, the more draconian we're going to be with the contract. It may well be that some big organisations, your Apples of this world, are actually going to start creating policy internally which prohibits overexposure, and therefore there will be almost contractual issues there that you'll never see. But again, they'll have consequences on the global trade. If we cannot grow organically our trade networks by supporting our small and medium enterprises, we're actually going to just keep distilling into fewer and fewer and fewer corporations, which are more and more highly integrated. And at that point, we're already in a situation where we have corporations who are bigger than governments, and it can be argued more powerful than governments, and certainly richer than governments, and therefore very influential on the globe. But they're not elected by anybody, and their interests aren't necessarily the global good. So there's some very big questions to ask there as to what contractual issues we'll have, and there needs to be some very serious scenario planning around that as to what the intended and unintended consequences of that will be.
Thanks, Ian. I mean, that's quite scary to think about. It particularly alarms me because the base of which the work that we do, and you have joined us in the work that we're looking at doing here, is that out of this recovery, we are trying to think about how we can improve supplier diversity with multinationals, corporates, small to medium enterprises, because that is incredibly important. We know that small business is the backbone, and we are seeing the effects of small businesses being able to operate during this current time is actually devastating. But what we need to come out of this is an opportunity for a solution that allows small businesses to be able to go in and get more access into multinational value chains. But that is a lot of work in terms of coordination effort. So what are your thoughts on that?
There's a couple of things there. I think people will say, you know, SMEs, they're too small to bother with. but actually they're where the innovation comes from. They tend to be full of very, very motivated people, smart people. They've started a business, they've got to have something there. And the opportunity they have to help bigger corporations move their own organizational objectives forward is huge, and it's missed. I think also the problem that we have here is that with big corporations, they're bureaucratic, and therefore getting access for SMEs into these organizations is crippling, because the amount of paperwork involved, the time it takes for an individual to do this, with no promise that anything's going to come at the end of it anyway, and you may simply be ticking a box in a buyer's list of, I've got to get 3 expressions of interest, and I've only got 2, so I'll use an SME. That happens quite a lot. I think what we can learn from is what we've seen happening with the innovation area, in that, you know, bureaucracies and big corporations don't like change. Innovation is all about change and disruption in a very good way. And what you see some of the smarter organizations doing is they set up little and our group business simply to protect them, shut them down because they're doing something different, and we don't like different. Now, perhaps with SMEs, we can either combine with the innovation space or actually create a parallel group where we have some of the smarter procurement, supply chain, operations, finance people who understand their own organization intimately, and potentially they've been around different functions in their own organization, or they've run a business unit, and we get those people looking out into the SME space, looking for those little gold nuggets.
Yeah. Well, I do know the gold nuggets there.
Opportunity that exists there, and they don't just gobble them up. What they do in operations, in how to run a business, to those, they develop them. Because if you do that with the different relationship with you than if I just trade with you over email, there is something deeply psychological in the human being of looking at somebody versus never seeing them and them just being an abstract concept. If we can be doing that with SMEs, where we can be bringing them together and they can be started a business, and it doesn't matter what it was for. And he said, I said, how's it going? He said, it's brilliant. He said, I've got work coming out my ears, and it was a trade. He was bringing stuff in, combining it into a product and then selling it on. He says, I've got loads of orders. They're getting bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. And I said, what's your cash flow? You know, it was a nothing comment to me. It just came out of my head. What's your cash flow? Next time I saw him, I said, what's the matter? He said, I've had to stop because I've run out of money. And it's bingo. And immediately he stopped and he looked at me. He said, you said, what's your cash flow, didn't you? Yeah. The thing is, bigger organizations, they don't know how much they know. That is absolutely worth a fortune to startups and to small companies who haven't had that exposure, who haven't had that learning, and who haven't developed to that level. They're on a different part of the journey at a different scale. And to be able to just spend time to have one of your better finance, more pragmatic finance people, just talk to them about how do you manage your money? What's the issue around, you know, days payable versus days receivable? Why does that matter? What can I do with it? How can I deal with things? You know, how do I organize an office or a shop floor? Simple things. How do I run an effective meeting?
Oh yes.
There's some big companies need to still learn that one. But, and you know, there are people who are on this webinar listening to this are going to be going, but it's obvious. And it is to us because we've gone through that part of our journey, and we've all perhaps gone to university. SMEs haven't necessarily, again, go back to Harvard, their study on what constitutes success in an individual. They say it is not the smartest people who are the most successful. What they say, it is the ones who do not give up. So if we can find people who don't give up and we can make them smarter, that investment, but it's there. And if it links to our business because we've done it with people who know our business, then that's your ROI. And then that's your step forward for your big corporation through your SMEs.
Well, I would agree with that. And I would also agree, though, that I still have not mastered the art of running a workshop. Because I had
There's safety in numbers.
A 3-hour virtual workshop today, and I wasn't very good at that. So, we're all continually learning. So, I can learn some skill sets from that. So we're coming up to the end of the hour. So at this point now, Ian, I'm just going to say thank you so much for your knowledge and your insight and your wisdom and your frankness, because I think we need a little bit more of that in today's society. Let's be frank. Let's be honest. Let's sort of deal with things as they come. Ian, if you can just move a slide forward, I think we'll be able to share your contact details.
There we go.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So if anyone wants to reach out to Ian, his email address is there. As I said in my introduction, he is a global supply chain expert, and he's also very frank and to the point and wants to work with businesses that want to get things done in terms of looking at opportunities in terms of global value chains. On another front, if you want to reach out to us at the GTPA on any issues you're experiencing within supply chains and your things, you can. Next week, we're going to be covering managing your remote workforce. Maybe we need Ian on to be really frank and to the point here in terms of that. But between this week and next week, we continue to ask you to be safe.